out where the western shadows fall, we uncover the chilling truth in every long-forgotten file. This is Cowboy Criminology, Serial Killer Saturdays.
Hey Cowboy Criminology crew, Derek Judd, the Cowboy Criminologist, here with Cowboy Criminology. It's been a little bit since I've been on a video with y'all. The last time I think I was on was when Dan D and I did our live, which was always awesome. I love working with Dan D. I'd been having issues scheduling conflicts with summer school for law school, waiting on my grades, doing an externship. I normally just teach one criminology class or criminal justice class at a time, and this summer I'm actually teaching two, so there's a lot going on for me. But I was really wanting to get another video out, and especially because a relatively new subscriber to Cowboy Criminology, emailed me and said that she had information about a particular serial killer who her husband went to high school with. And it's always two things. First, I always love doing requests for people, for subscribers. And when a subscriber has this personal historical knowledge of an individual, I'm very curious. And what really got me about the serial killer we're going to talk about today, Gary Taylor, is that he had completely managed to slip under my radar. And I was wondering why that could be, because the more I read about him, the more I became convinced I should have known about this individual. And I couldn't really figure out why he managed to fly so low under the radar. And it's not that he doesn't have an interesting story. It's not that his crimes aren't worthy of being discussed. I just think he kind of got lost in the shuffle. So I found some really good stuff about him, and I'd like to share them with you. I haven't done a Serial Killer Saturday in a long time. It's always been a favorite of mine here on Cowboy Criminology. It's not one of my They're not one of my better liked videos. They don't get a lot of traffic, but the people who do stop and watch them generally tend to get quite a bit out of it. So let's start here with a little biographical information. So Gary Taylor was born in 1936 in Michigan, and mom, dad, older brother, pretty unimpressive home life. And by that, I mean very typical of what you'd expect for people growing up in the 1930s. Not a whole lot of surprises there. There's not a lot of detail about him as a child, other than, you know, some pretty small town stuff, like his birthday came up in the newspaper and said that he treated his class to like cake and ice cream, which is kind of interesting. And then there was when he was 15 years old, he was involved in a car accident. It said he and his brother were bruised and sore. The family vehicle was a wreck. And I was really hoping to find something in there in the car accident that would talk about maybe some head trauma, unconsciousness, something we might recognize today is TBI. And it is possible that Taylor did end up having some sort of repercussions from this, but there's nothing, and the reason I'm giving you that background information is I'm trying to see if there's anything in his past that would explain his actions going forward. And unfortunately, there's very, very little here that I've been able to find. And what I've seen on Reddit and social media, I know some other YouTubers have done videos on him. There's just not a whole lot about him. There's very, very little known. So Adabee, I want to thank you for providing me with this treasure trove of information that I don't feel like a lot of other people uh, have access to. So let's see here. Let's go to where am I? There they are. So Adabee was so awesome because she labeled all of these newspaper articles so they're in chronological order, which just makes things awesome for me. So in 1946, I want to show you. I'm going to show you some stuff just to show you just how benign most serial killers start off. So this is a school program uh, for around Christmas time, 1946, and Gary Taylor is singing as one of the voice of the three wise men. 1948, March 30th was Gary Taylor's birthday, and he treated his room to ice cream and cookies. I'm sorry, ice cream and cookies, not cake. Now, here's the interesting part, okay? 1950, he goes, Cadet Gary Addison Taylor, son of Mr. and Mrs. Milo A. Taylor of 216 West Street in Howell, left September 7th for Howe Military School to take up his residence for the school year 1950 to 1951. Formal classes started on Monday, September 11th, and the new cadets will be given 3 days of orientation and testing before old cadets return. Now, military school, military associations, and serial killers are something, as a criminologist, you always want to be aware of. Does it always mean something bad or untoward? No, of course not. But given the time, the 1950s, the very early 1950s, young men with disciplinary problems were often sent to military school. Now, sometimes if the family had a strong military tradition, they were trying to get appointments to West Point, Annapolis, the Naval Academy, which I think at the time were the only big ones because I don't believe the Air Force Academy had been started at that time. So under those circumstances, you'd absolutely expect to see a junior high school aged male go to military school. Now, interestingly enough, I looked this up and I wasn't able to find anything else about him being rejected from military school, kicked out of military school, disciplinary problems at military school, because the next thing I can find, once again, courtesy of Adabee, is an accident that I was telling you about that he and his brother were in. His brother's a couple years older. He was driving. They got into an accident with a panel truck. The car was a total loss. Both of the boys were okay, but this is 2 years after he went to military school. Now, did he just go to military school for 2 years? Did he get out? Did he not like it? Was he expelled? Because there is a significant number of serial killers who have gone through, who have been put into military school unwillingly and were not successful. They can't adapt to a structured way of living. They can't adapt to a structured way of living their lives. The rigid discipline, it all comes crashing down on them. So military school is very interesting. Now, does that explain anything about his future? Well, at the time, it would have been unlikely that he came across any female personnel. So, his quote unquote, you'll learn that he's often identified as a woman hater. Doesn't really help us in this context. A possibility that is crept into my mind is that it is possible that perhaps the reason he's no longer in military school is because of accusations that were made against him, or he was found to behave in a way towards females that reflected poorly on the academy. Military academies tend to be very prim and proper. They don't like scandal. So could an incident with a female at this time have been what derailed his potential military career, getting into a good school, something like that? It's entirely possible. The lack of information leaves us with a lot of questions, not a whole lot of answers. And so we got to kind of play the numbers here, right? And you've heard me, if you followed my channel for any time at all, you know, I always say play the numbers. What is the most likely scenario to explain what's happening? And criminologically, either being accused by a female or being accused of inappropriate behavior towards a female would certainly seem to fit the bill. Let's see what else we got. So in 1955, Taylor gets identified by 6 young women as the person who's accosted them. Taylor, as you'll see here in just a little bit, was a blitz style attacker. He kind of laid in wait, waiting for unaccompanied females to cross his path, and then he'd attack with, most commonly it was a hammer or a wrench. This is very interesting to me, because ambush style attackers are generally considered to be cowards. They don't like direct upfront confrontation. They don't want somebody who's going to fight back or readily engage in conflict. Ironically enough, Ted Bundy was like that. Even though you don't think of him as a blitz or ambush style killer, that's exactly what he was. And if you think about it, he never made his attacks until he was completely in control. He had them in the seat of his Volkswagen Beetle. He had them completely alone, where nobody could come to their aid, something like that. So the idea that this individual, that Gary Taylor, who's 19 at this time, roughly, would attack in that way is really not surprising. But I want to go ahead and I want to take a look at this article. So interesting. So it talks about the different types of crimes. It talks about how he's not talking to the police. Um, it talks about who was injured. Still lives with his parents at 19 years old. I don't think that would have been so uncommon even in the 1950s to be 19 and still living at home, especially you consider he's just graduated. Maybe he's trying to figure things out, maybe taking that gap year, trying to figure out school, military, something like that. Of course, military school might have taken that away from him. Um, let's see, the article says he was 18 at the time. Suspicion of being the infamous bus stop marauder. And that's exactly what we expected from him. But up to this point, he hadn't killed anybody, at least that we know of. Um, the fact that he refuses to talk is not does not surprise me at this stage in his career. Now you will see he does become more talkative, which I think is odd, especially in the context of another killing that he's associated with. But he was spotted watching the bus, and victims helped identify him, and they brought him. Excuse me, they brought him to justice. It's wild. There are a couple detectives who were talking about how dangerous this individual was, but it's interesting that the justice system kind of said, well, yeah, I mean, he could have killed these people, but he didn't kill these people. Um, and I don't want you to get the wrong idea, okay? Um, I don't want you to get the wrong idea that this was about being soft on crime or nobody wanting to deal with the problem. I think you have to remember that in 1955, crimes like this were very scarce. They didn't happen a lot, and if they did happen, they certainly didn't happen in middle white America, right? Um, so in November of that year, he goes on trial. He was arrested in January '55. Goes on trial. Um, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, this is where. Wow. Okay. So this is interesting. The broad-shouldered youth hotly denied accusations that he was the marauder and was released on $500 bond after 6 of the attacked women identified him in a police lineup. The accosted women all gave detectives the same story of how youth approached them as they left the bus and asked them to get in the car or shut up, don't scream, and you won't get hurt. Ted Bundy used very similar language when he was forcing a woman into the car or trying to prevent the woman from screaming. Um, so at the time, he was living in Treasure Island, Florida. They had looked at him for 2 months. Yeah, it's very interesting. So he's in he's in Florida at this time. Now, I'm going to take you back just a little further, and I'm going off of correspondence that I have with Adabee. Um, her husband and Gary Taylor were classmates, and they both played the trumpet. And he went over to Gary's house a couple of times. They did rehearsals and things like that. Um, I think Adabee's husband kind of felt something was off, and those suspicions were confirmed by Adabee's husband when uh, Taylor was physically removed from class by a teacher, and of course, in the scuffle and everything, they start exchanging blows. So if you're looking, so between 1950, he's a cadet in military school. 1955, he's a 19-year or an 18-year-old youth being charged with these type of crimes. Now, if you look on the beginning of that, the military school, and the end of that, um, being in Florida as the bus stop marauder, and look in the middle at the fight with the teacher, that's very significant, because that to me all but confirms that Taylor had a significant issue with authority figures. So we go from potential cadet, there's the accident, there's the fight with the teacher, and then there's the marauder. Well, shortly after the incident, if I'm remembering the story right, and I'm sure Adabee will correct me if I'm wrong, while her husband was fiddling with his bicycle or something, he heard a ping go by him, and he turned around and he sees Taylor hiding behind a lattice-like structure, looking at him, and he had a BB gun that he had shot at her husband with. Once again, this is an ambush style killer. Now, or an ambush style attack, because obviously, we'll find out Taylor was a pretty crappy shot. Um, which, thank goodness for small miracles, right? Um, but Taylor does become a long distance serial killer, and that is the correct terminology, verbiage for a person who likes to, for a killer who likes to shoot at people from a distance. Most of the time, you think about serial killers, we think up close, we think personal, we think strangulation, suffocation, we think. We think about all of these different types of things, right? But a long distance serial killer is often the penultimate coward. They want to cause mayhem, they want to cause destruction, they don't want to be close enough to see what they've done. I've always had an issue with long distance serial killers being labeled as snipers. First off, I think that's an overly generous compliment of their marksmanship skills. And two, most snipers, professional snipers, are trained to stay on target so that they can confirm the kill. And most long distance serial killers, whether it's the Beltway snipers, Gary Taylor, or anyone else that you can think of that fits this bill, they're going to pull the trigger and they're immediately going to flee the area. They don't want to be confronted with what they've done, which also poses another interesting question. Okay, so Gary Taylor starts off as the bus stop marauder, right? And he's attacking with a hammer or a wrench. So why the change in MO? Well, I think it. I don't think I'm taking a huge leap here by saying that. Well, most likely he's an adaptive serial killer. He learned that if he tries to, his incompetence in attacking close up prevents him from being able to get away, not being seen. He attacks violently, but not violently enough to kill. Um, which is which definitely fills in a lot of missing information about him. At least we can contextualize that. Um, let's see. He goes to trial. The trial seems pretty benign. Everything seems pretty benign about his trial. I want to see. Now, another interesting thing is at the time that he's the bus stop marauder in Clear Lake, Florida. Um, Clear Lake had or Clearwater, excuse me. Um, Clearwater, Florida, is no stranger to serial killers. Serial killers winding up there, serial killers operating there, serial killers being born there. It's a very dubious distinction for them. Let's see. Okay, so here's the conviction. After more than 6 hours of deliberation, jury returned a verdict yesterday about noon, finding Gary Addison Taylor, 19, of Treasure Island, not guilty of assault with intent to murder. The young man was specifically charged with assaulting Miss Ruby Wesley with a 12-inch Stilson wrench in St. Petersburg last December after he got off the bus to walk to her home a block away. She identified Taylor as the assailant. Uh, so, interestingly enough, the judge in the case explained that the jury was only to consider testimony or should not consider the testimony about other women identifying the defendant except to show the identity and mode of operation. That's pretty wild. This is intriguing because why did it take them? Okay, I'm trying to figure out. He ended up being convicted of minor charges, right? Um, so that's 55. 1956, he and another individual um, were charged with molestation of two car hops. Now, uh, molested in this context probably doesn't have the same connotation that you're thinking of. Um, you could think about it in terms of maybe like verbal assault, terroristic threat, something along those lines. Um, Given $100 bond each. Oh, one of them decided to draw a revolver. Oh no, I'm sorry. An undercover or a plainclothes officer drew his pistol when he saw what was going on, and he intervened. Now, nothing like having an off-duty officer as your foil. Uh, So they end up charging him and the youth, but so we're starting to see the escalation. All right, we're starting to see, what do we got? We got rebellion against authority. We've got a history of assaults, history of petty crime. Okay, these are things that I would absolutely expect to see for somebody like Taylor. Now, in 1957, Taylor gets arrested as the Detroit Sniper. And so let me read this to you. The St. Petersburg police last night hinted a new probe of a bus stop marauder's 1955 reign of terror. After one-time suspect Gary Addison Taylor was jailed in Detroit as a phantom sniper. Taylor, 20, former Tomlinson Vocational School student, was jailed Thursday night after a wild 3-hour auto tour through 4 Detroit suburbs. 2 girls were hit by 22 caliber rifle bullets. A dozens escaped unwounded. Detroit police said blonde 6-foot Taylor had terrorized the burbs since December 22nd. And this is February 9th. Okay, this guy has a very slow unlearning curve, which I would absolutely expect to see. Taylor was freed here of a charge he assaulted a 39-year-old theater cashier and attempted to murder her. Police labeled the other attacks on women waiting at lonely bus stops as the work of the marauder. These are the cases that police may probe again. Taylor's Detroit attorney said he would seek a psychiatric examination for his client. Good call. He quoted Taylor as saying, "I'm sorry about all the trouble I caused. I'm very remorseful, but I have periodic spells when I do things I can't remember. I'm not responsible." Interesting. Here's a serial killer. What do you call it? A serial killer cliche. Praised by neighbors. Taylor, described by Detroit neighbors as an ideal son, yesterday said he became the phantom sniper of suburban Royal Oak because of a sex compulsion to hurt women. Okay, now I'm reading this for the very first time, and I just said earlier that his actions towards women may have been the reason he's no longer at the academy, right, or the military school. Taylor volunteered yesterday that when he was he did go into the Navy. He and another sailor beat up a Massachusetts woman with a monkey wrench and bragged that was never reported to the police. I'm a little surprised to find out that he was in the Navy. And knowing that now, I almost wonder if there wasn't a big chicken dinner, bad conduct discharge, or a dishonorable discharge. I find it very difficult to believe that he would have adapted to military life, especially in the 1950s Navy. I mean, the Navy in the 1950s, I mean, you know, they were pretty wild and unruly. I mean, I know the Marine Corps has a bad reputation for it, but the Navy, especially at this time, were absolutely no saints. But that does seem to track my theory about him shooting at the women. Very, very interesting. And so this leads to other cases being opened up. He's really only charged with assault. His real crime is being a crappy shot. Um, that's why I don't like it when they say he's a sniper. No, he's not a sniper. He couldn't shoot himself out of a wet paper bag. So as things go on, as we're starting to get more information about him, more information's being and coming forward about his history. We kind of learn about, oh, this is interesting. Okay, I want to go back because I think this is interesting. At Home Father says he mentioned that Taylor's father, Milo Taylor, testified that his son was at home the entire evening when the attacks occurred, and that friends of the family told of the son playing cards with them at Taylor's homes. Mann expressed to the belief that the state failed to break down the alibi offered by the father and friends of the family. Okay, so this is why apparently he was acquitted. He mentioned the several women who took the stand to tell of being molested by Taylor and declared that the presiding judge ruled later that the jury could not consider their testimony except as it showed a general modus operandi by the defendant. Why did they permit them to testify at all? So this is a juror talking. Then there's this interesting part, moonlight factor. He said also that Mrs. Ruby Wesley, the attack victim who made positive identification of Taylor, mentioned that during the testimony she was able to do so because of the bright moonlight. Now, interesting criminological fact. Crime tends to increase during the full moon. And if you've ever worked in a hospital, if you've ever been a first responder of any kind, you tend to know that the full moon does tend to have an effect on your shift. It does, or at least that's the perceived notion. I've experienced it. My wife's experienced it. She's a nurse. We'd always joke. Is it a full moon for you too? It's like apparently because the calls weren't always bad, but sometimes they were just the most preposterous things you could think of, and it really makes you wonder about the direction of humanity. But crime does go up during a full moon because if you think about it, you're not going to draw a lot of attention to yourself using extra light. You've got plenty of ambient light. You're able to move around somewhat undetected, and people tend to have a false sense of security during a full moon because they think that they're able to see well enough, and they don't tend to take the same precautions that they do when there's less ambient light. So I think that's interesting. I think that's very interesting, very telling. So 1957, we're still in 1957, December 13th. Former Howell youth in trouble. Gary Taylor admits he is the Royal Oak area's phantom sniper. So he's now 21 years old. Most military hitches are 4 years, so unless you get discharged for a medical, which is an honorable discharge, a bad conduct discharge, or a dishonorable discharge, I don't see how he could have done 2 years in the Navy at this around this time, unless he was a draftee on a 2-year hitch. Every instinct I have, if I'm going to play the numbers, is saying that the Navy was not a successful, or he did not successfully transition into the Navy. So he's charged with assault to commit with intent to commit murder for his actions as a sniper. Now this is interesting. because he goes from not being talkative in the Marauder case to wanting to share all. Following his arrest, police say young Taylor admitted he is the much publicized Phantom Sniper who for several months on infrequent occasions has terrorized the suburban area by shooting at women from his car. On his spree last Thursday night, young Taylor wounded 2 young women with a .22 caliber rifle and shot at 7 others. He is being held at Royal Oak Jail. He has been sought since before Christmas, but his identity has not been established until last week's outburst. It is said he was sought for at least 9 shooting incidents. Let's see here. Talks a little bit about his father. His family owned a men's clothing shop. Oh, wait a minute. The Taylor family sold the store here to enter the motel business in St. Petersburg, Florida. And then Gary also got into trouble being freed by a jury on a charge similar to that now facing him in Royal Oak. After the incident, the family moved back to Michigan to buy a store in the suburban community. Young Taylor has been a factory worker since the family moved to Royal Oak. Okay, perfect. So, average to below average intelligence, menially employed. Nothing in here is very shocking. But March 27th, he's judged to be insane. Gary Taylor, former Howell youth, sent to Ionia State Hospital. 20-year-old Gary Taylor, Oakland County's Phantom Sniper, last Friday was committed to the Ionia State Hospital for the criminal, pretty sure that's supposed to be criminally insane. He is a former Howell resident, son of Mr. and Mrs. Milo Taylor, who operated a men's furnishing store here for several years, then moved to Florida. A couple years ago, they entered the mercantile business at Royal Oak. Circuit Judge Frank Doty acted at a sanity hearing. It's obviously before Grammarly. At a sanity hearing after a panel of psychiatrists reported Taylor was dangerously mentally ill. I did not need 8 years of medical school to be able to tell you that. And you probably didn't need anything other than Cowboy Criminology to say, yeah, this guy's messed up. The youth who had been working at a factory said he was pleased with the decision. Well, yeah, and this is why. So in sentencing, in penology, the study of judicial punishment is what it's called. In penology, there are 2 types of sentences. There are determinate sentences, meaning that the sentence will be carried out. You have to do so many years. You have to, you're on death row. Okay, those are determinate sentences. You know when they begin, you know presumptively when they're going to end. And then there's indeterminate sentences. America as a whole does not like indeterminate sentences. America tends to like to know how long people are going to face. Other countries, Norway, for example, use indeterminate sentencing because under their laws, a lot of countries will only the maximum sentence that somebody can get is like 18 to 25 years. And if in order to do an indeterminate sentence, there has to be a new trial on a regular basis, 3 years, 5 years, what have you, to be able to determine if the individual is still a threat to society. Um, Anders Breivik, the he went on a rampage and was shooting children at a summer camp for uh, the right wing party of the government. It's a horrible, horrible case. Um, terrifying case. He's on an indeterminate sentence, and he gets resentenced every few years. It's unlikely that until Anders becomes so broken down that they're sure he can't hurt anybody, they're never going to let him out. Now, coming back to America, we do see indeterminate sentences in cases involving mental health. And the reason that happens is, despite what most people believe, the American justice system is built on the idea of rehabilitation. It is. It's poorly executed, but the idea is there. And the idea is, if somebody is sentenced to be in a mental hospital, they are going to stay there until they're deemed not to be a threat to society. So yeah, Taylor thinking that's a win is going to be great, because he is not. He's never going to be the toughest guy in the yard, right? Um, and then we go several years without hearing anything about him. We know he gets released. We know he's being seen by a high profile um, psychiatrist who is involved in many cases around this time. I want to find my timeline for him. Let's see. Um, Try to figure out when he was released. This is not my timeline. Is it the right place the whole time? I was at the right place the whole time. Okay. So 1957, he's working, or he gets accommodation to go to a trade school. I think he's learning to be a welder at this time, if I'm not mistaken. 1960, while he's supposed to be in school, he robs and rapes an unidentified woman in the Detroit area. 1961, he barges into a rooming house and he threatens the house manager and her daughter with an 18-inch butcher knife. 1972, we find him in Houston, Texas. Again, he assaults a 16-year-old girl, a 21-year-old woman. This makes him an ephebophile, somebody who's attracted to children generally of the or to individuals generally of the opposite sex that are in uh, late puberty or just post adolescence. The fact that most of his victims tend to be 16 and older seems to track with that. Why attack the woman in her late 30s, almost 40? Because he's a young offender, I think he's trying to find out like what works for him. Um, I think maybe attacking the older woman was more risky. She had more life experience. She was able to keep her wits about her, and so I think the attack on the younger women um, played a big role in in choosing his victims. I think it helped keep him from being identified. But let's see, we're in 19. What did I say we were doing? We're 1961, and I want to find the date because I want to be sure. I'm I don't feel like I'm making a leap here, but I think I'm making a connection, and I don't think 73. Okay. Sandy Horwath, Michigan woman whose mother disappeared 50 years ago this month, is appealing for more information from the public, hoping to crack the case. Sandy's a 33-year-old divorcee. She was living in Ann Arbor in 1973. She's a clerical worker at the local hospital. Uh, let's see. So the issue is October 2nd, 1973, she goes missing. Now, Sandy is known by Gary Taylor. The connection between them we don't know, but the way she's described as being very youthful, it would seem like she'd be a likely target. The problem here, the best we can surmise, is that in 1972 he was in Houston, Texas, and in 1973 he was in Washington. Now, does that mean he can't have come back? Absolutely not. Now, here's the interesting thing. Taylor completely denies being involved in Sandy's killing. The timeline does tend to support this notion that he didn't have anything to do with it. But I'm going to lay something out here. Tell me what you think. The most times, most serial killers, their first victim is the most important. It's the one who generally has the closest link to him. All right. To me, it seems probable that if Gary had been in the area, it would not be out of the realm of possibility that he is the one who killed her. He knew her. She was definitely his type, slightly built, youthful looking. Um, so the other thing I have issues with is Gary likes to talk. Whenever he's caught, he seems to like to talk. The older he gets, I think he likes the notoriety. I think he likes the recognition. So why didn't he talk in this case? Did he genuinely not do it, or playing devil's advocate and playing the numbers? Is it possible that what happened to Sandy was so extreme, even for what he's done in the past, what he's fantasized about, that it terrified him to the point where he didn't want to talk about it. Now, you might think, all right, yeah, I see where you're going with that, but I think you're making a leap. If you've ever watched the documentary with Arthur Shawcross, the Genesee River Killer, you will notice that there are certain crimes that he will not discuss, and makes it very, very clear to the interviewer. We talked about this before. I said we weren't going to talk about it. You brought it up. I'll end the interview instead of talking with this about, or talking about that case with you. Um, Very interesting. Now in Washington, he's connected to two murders. He murders Susan Jackson and a newlywed, Vonnie Sleuth. Horrible to see the lives of two young people taken for absolutely no reason. Now, terrifyingly enough, and I haven't been able to come up with a good reason for this yet, but in multiple cases, Gary Taylor buried the bodies of his victims on his property. Now, there's no evidence that suggests that he was a necrophile. There's nothing to suggest that he was a collector. So he's not the Ted Bundy type to go out and spend time with his victims. I was going to say quality time, but I could not make that work without that just repulsing me. But then he's not Ned Kemper. He's not collecting. He's not like the Sunset Strip slayers who would doll up the heads or anything like that. There's nothing to show that. So this would seem to show that Taylor is a mixed type personality, as far as being, he's not organized, but he exhibits disorganized behavior, a lack of planning, very impulsive, takes actions that almost guarantee he's going to get killed. Now, interestingly enough, the keeping of the bodies on the property would tend to point to a disorganized personality. But it's also said that his victims were stabbed and beaten to death. And so why did he abandon the MO of the long distance serial killer? First, I don't think he was a good enough shot to be able to make that effective. Secondly, I think as he got older, I think he became more comfortable in confrontation. And if you look at the age of his victims, as he got older, his victims, stayed in their mid-teens to early 20s. So I don't think there was. So I don't think that's necessarily rare for a young offender to start off with one MO. As they get better at their craft, as they get better at avoiding detection, they kind of fall into a position where they find what works for them. Now, in 1973, he takes off to Washington, and he's in roughly the same area as Ted Bundy. As a matter of fact, there were 6 killings that originally were attributed to Taylor that ended up being connected to Bundy. Now, this is not unusual. In Santa Cruz, California, in the 1960s, Ed Kemper, Herb Mullins, and the original freeway killer, put myself on the spot now, I can't remember his name. But there were 3 active serial killers all in one location, okay? That's a very small area for 3 serial killers to be working in the same area. So it is possible. As a matter of fact, until the FBI was able to sit down with Herb Mullins and Ed Kemper, they were convinced that the others' body counts were higher. But then when, Ed Kemper was like, no, these are the only ones I killed, they're like, oh, okay. And they had no reason to doubt Ed because I think Ed Kemper wanted to really understand why he was the way he was. I think he had a philosophical fascination with why he was the way he was. I don't think it would change anything for him. I don't think he'd go back and undo all the harm he did if he had the opportunity to. As far as serial killers go, he has a profound knowledge and insight of why he commits the crimes he does. Let's see. So 75. Now, 1975, Royal Oak sniper sought by Seattle police. There's some good news. Former Howard resident, once known as the Phantom Sniper, is being sought by Seattle police for questioning about the disappearance of a 19-year-old housewife. Is this... I'm trying to see if they name the housewife, but I think this is, if I'm not mistaken on my chronology, I think this is going to be... I think this is going to be Vonnie Stuth, who they're investigating. And Vonnie Stuth was a newlywed, and he was eventually tried and convicted of killing her. But Vonnie Stuth's mother actually started the victim support services that most large-scale police departments, and if not most county jurisdictions, have a victim support services individual to help people cope. Sometimes you look at these horrible things that happen, and you have to understand that there are people who turn these bad things into good things. You had John and John Walsh and his wife, and the Collins family were instrumental in the victims' rights movement. The fact that, inmates stayed on death row for 20, 30 years with no end in sight to their appeals and one thing or another. John Walsh, of course, is the host of America's Most Wanted, has a very personal connection to victims' rights. His 6-year-old son, Adam, was violently murdered. And if I'm not mistaken, Otis Toole was conclusively connected to that crime. Otis Toole was a vagrant, a drifter, bisexual, cannibal, hustler, and serial killer. Quite the resume he's got there. But he also hung around with Henry Lee Lucas. And if you've ever seen Michael Rooker in Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, Michael Rooker, first off, I think he's an underrated actor. And second of all, I think that movie does not get the praise it really deserves for its accuracy. But I've always liked Michael Rooker anyway. So they're making the connection. And you have to understand that around this time, Taylor is supposed to be in the custody of the state, or at least they're supposed to know where he's at, one thing or another. So technically, he's an escaped mental patient at this time. And then in 1975, he's linked to the murder of a Houston woman, and then let's see, that's May 20th. They believe he killed an unnamed woman in Houston, but May 22nd, he's found to have killed Lee Fletcher, 25, and Deborah Henneman, 23, buried in his backyard in Onstead, Michigan. So again, you have somebody who is displaying a phenomenal ability to stay out of trouble, evade law enforcement, and yet he goes out of his way to do things that all but ensure he's going to get caught. Now, this is a great article. Girl Hater is native of Howell. And I'll blow this up so I can read this to you. The man who admitted slaying 4 women in 3 states and is suspected in more than 20 other killings or disappearances is a Howell native. Gary Addison Taylor, 39, now confined in Houston jail, lived in Howell through his junior year in high school. Classmates remember him for 3 things. He played trumpet well, he was a physical fitness buff, and most importantly, he had a hot temper. Taylor was arrested last week for the murder of 21-year-old cocktail waitress and the rape or attempted rape of 5 other Houston women, including a 16-year-old pregnant mother. He has since signed a confession admitting that he killed both the Houston girl and a 19-year-old housewife in Seattle, in a suburb of Seattle, Washington. Today, however, Taylor told a Houston judge that the police beat a confession out of him. And I don't know about that. Taylor's been on unauthorized leave from a Ypsilanti mental institution since December 1973, although officials didn't notify police until last January. Houston police say Taylor has also verbally admitted killing 2 Toledo girls whose bodies were found Thursday, buried beneath the master bedroom window of a house he once owned in Onstead, about 15 miles northeast of Adrian. Police uncovered the bodies after a tip from Tyler's ex-wife, who is now living in San Diego. She said that Taylor told her about the killings when he was drunk, but at first she didn't believe him, and then she was afraid to go to the police, according to her attorney. She phoned Houston police when she read about this arrest. Houston detective Carol Stevenson was quoted in the Detroit Free Press as saying Taylor was mean but very intelligent. I'm with you on the mean. I guess intelligent is subjective. There's a comedian named John Caparulo who's absolutely hilarious, and in his first comedy special, Meet Cap, he talks about calling somebody who speaks 7 languages an idiot, and somebody corrected him. Oh, that guy's not an idiot. He speaks 7 languages. And he goes, that doesn't make him intelligent. That just means more people in more languages know he's an idiot. And so I always think of that. Yeah, intelligence is very subjective. This is wild. I feel like he is far away and the most dangerous person I've ever talked to in my 14 years I've been doing this work. His dangerous person tag may not surprise Howell classmates who knew him when he allegedly beat up a science teacher who kept him after class. Taylor's parents, who operated a men's clothing store, moved to Florida in or about 1953. A few years later, Taylor made his first Michigan headlines as the Royal Oak Sniper. In 1957, he was committed to the Ionia State Hospital after he was arrested for shooting at 12 to 15 women over a period of time in various Detroit suburbs. Let's see here. He was returned to Ionia. And then in 1970, Taylor was transferred to the Center for Forensic Psychiatry in Ypsilanti State Hospital. And 2 years later, he was freed on convalescent status, provided he returned monthly for therapy. He missed his first session in December 73, but was discovered living in a $40,000 ranch-style home in Onstead in March. Forensic officials allowed him to remain free when promised to continue his therapy and treatments. However, he never returned for another session and apparently left Onstead less than a month after forensic personnel located him. Although Taylor has been on unauthorized leave from the Forensic Center since December 73, state mental health officials didn't notify state police of his absence until January of this year. At the time, Forensic Center spokesman blamed the omission on a clerical error. The error allowed Taylor to escape arrest in Seattle suburb last December when police questioned him about the disappearance of a woman who was his neighbor. Taylor refused to answer their questions, but agreed to return for a lie detector test. He never returned. You don't say. Taylor refused to answer their had forensic officials reported Taylor's absence, Seattle police would have spotted his name during a routine check. This is where NCIC, the National Crime Information Computer, comes in handy. When somebody's entered into the NCIC, and every state has their own version. Texas, it's TCIC. New Mexico, it's New Mexico Information Computer, or NCCIC maybe? New Mexico Criminal Information Computer. So every state has their own thing, right? But the fact is, the psychiatrist who's overseeing him, the Dr. Roby, I think he was the scapegoat in all of this because he ended up getting fired for this. All the blame was put on him, but I think Dr. Roby was in kind of a bad situation. You have the medical side and you have the legal side. The legal side says, well, it's up to the medical side to decide when this individual is rehabilitated or free to leave. And the medical side kind of points to the legal side and said, we're not equipped to deal with an individual like this. He needs to be put in prison. And then you have the legislatures who pretty much sit back and laugh at both sides because they could easily fix the problem and choose not to. For me, um, I think Roby was trying to do the best he could in a bad situation, and I think he was the one left holding the bag. Um, but I've also got to I'm also going to come to his defense on this. This is 1975. Okay, the the authority on these types of offenders has not even been published yet because the research was still being done by John Douglas, Robert Ressler, and Roy Hazelwood, along with Ann Burgess and her husband. So they are compiling data at a previously unknown rate. And Ann Burgess is making sure that everything is done to strict academic standards so it's actually useful. It has to pass peer review and it has to be academically accepted. Now, Douglas, Ressler, and Hazelwood could care less if it was academically accepted because it's not their the information they were uncovering wasn't for academics. It was for law enforcement officers. Um, and I have to say that when you're confronted with somebody with a type of criminal that you're not used to dealing with, and you don't know what questions to ask, where to start, you're operating behind the eight ball. And if you find yourself operating behind the eight ball, you're never going to get in front of it. And I think that's what happened here. But Taylor was suspected in killings on Colorado ski resort in Aspen. That's interesting. You know who else liked to go to Aspen? Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy spent time there. If I'm not mistaken, roughly around the same time. So these two traveled in incredibly concentric circles. Um, Police in Colorado ski resort villages of Aspen, where a Dearborn nurse was killed in February, and Vail, where a 26-year-old woman ski instructor was murdered in March, would like to question Taylor. If I'm not mistaken, those are two cases that were specifically um, the work of Ted Bundy of Ted Bundy. 75 seems about right. I seem to remember the Dearborn nurse and the ski instructor seem to ring a bell, and I'm pretty sure those were eventually linked to Ted Bundy. But odds are Taylor got credit for Bundy's kills. Bundy got credit for Taylor's kills. Taylor's probably never going to come clean with how many people he killed. And Ted Bundy, I believe he estimated that he had killed over 100 women um, and teenage girls. I would I would tend to believe that. Um, a lot of times with Bundy, it's hard to tell when he's posturing. But one thing about Ted Bundy, if you listen to his interviews, he is all about Ted Bundy. And so if something makes him look, for lack of a better term, better, like he's a better criminal, he's a more sophisticated criminal, he's a more dangerous criminal, he's going to eat that up. And why wouldn't he? Um, this is This case with Taylor is wild. It's interesting to see the overlap. Um, Supreme Court offers aura of sanctity but not sanity. The recent Michigan Supreme Court decision reducing Byron Hoffmeister's conviction from first-degree murder was bound to stir up much emotion. It did. Ray Braden, the father of the girl Hoffmeister was convicted of killing, has started both a letter writing and petition campaign imploring the Supreme Court to reconsider its decision. Normally, we would feel that the court should not be influenced by a rash of letters or signatures. It is the judiciary's job to interpret the law faithfully, even if such an interpretation is unpopular. However, the nature of this case, especially in light of the current legal environment, makes us hope that the justices pay attention to Braden's message. People are tired of and frightened by reading about violent crimes committed by already convicted criminals. If you followed Cowboy Criminology for any length of time, you have seen videos where I cannot contain my disappointment because a violent offender who shouldn't have been out on parole was out on parole or probation and committed another violent crime. And it's tragic. You look at the number of individuals who were on some sort of supervised release when they were at the peak of their killing. Ed Kemper comes immediately to mind. It's absolutely crazy. And I did a video about should we really have cashless bail in America, given that a guy was released in California and not 2 hours after being released, kidnapped and assaulted a woman. I mean, at what point does the state have to take any kind of accountability, right? So it goes on. What's so very frustrating is that the power that be, whether they may be legislators, judges, or mental health officials, seem to be doing little to bring workable changes. Gary Taylor, the girl hater from Howl, who made national headlines a week ago, is a prime example. Repeatedly, psychiatrists and police officers have called him a dangerous man who cannot and should not be allowed to roam free. Yet, ever since his Phantom Sniper days in Royal Oak, he has been continuously released, only to commit more crimes. His last violent spree began after he left Ypsilanti Forensic Center on unauthorized leave. Incredibly, officials of the center were so unconcerned about his absence that they failed to notify the police of his disappearance for more than a year. Even if Taylor had never escaped, mental health officials say he would have been released anyway because of recent legislation and Supreme Court rulings regarding the rights of those found not guilty of their crimes by reason of insanity. Legislatures admit new mental health law encompasses too wide a spectrum of patients, but as yet has done nothing to rectify the situation. How crazy it is that we are sitting here 51 years later and we are still fighting those same battles. And like I said, I hadn't read this until I pulled it up, but I'm telling y'all, that's the power of criminology. It really, truly is. Because once you understand, once you gain a firm knowledge of criminology, it's almost like they put this record on repeat. Let's see what we have here. So the Phantom Sniper, after his reign of terror came to an end, he was given a 90-year minimum sentence. This was to be served in Washington, where he is now, if I'm not mistaken. Texas had talked about indicting him or extraditing him and having him stand trial in Texas, but they realized he wasn't going anywhere, and Washington was not going to release the hold on him so that they could give him the death penalty. Depending on how you feel about that, that may or may not be a good thing. But yeah, last I checked, he was still alive in the Washington penitentiary. It's just incredible. And so, cold case unit officers and new detectives, often assigned to cold case units, will look at cases like this and try and see if they can put a known offender in their jurisdiction at a given time when they know somebody was murdered. I think it's great. I think cold case units are fantastic. I wish they had more resources and more training. But I have often pondered after I retire from my legal career, given my experience in corrections and law enforcement, now the legal, I'd kind of like to join one of those cold case, like they have the Sherlock Society and they have a couple of others made up of retired law enforcement officers, attorneys, things like that, social workers who will sit down, they'll look at cold cases, and they'll try to see if they can find common ties and try to solve these cases. Very, very interesting. The fact that Gary Taylor had never been on my radar up until March of this year, when Adabee reached out to me and said, "I've got a wild one for you." This is the second time I've done a show where somebody has had a personal connection with a serial killer. If you get the chance, watch my Serial Killer Saturday on Ferry and Wardrip. That was another one I did. I'm going to try. It's so difficult trying to shoot these videos. Everybody knows I have my only real time is Saturday and Sunday, and that's the time they plan for me to do things. I think I've gotten over the hump where everything now has a place. I'm going to try to do more videos. I'm going to try to be. I really wanted to do this live. It just wasn't realistic to do that. But I've got some interesting stuff coming up. I think the next Serial Killer Saturday, I've been wanting to do this one for a while, is going to be Arthur Shawcross, the Genesee River Killer from Rochester, New York. If you followed my channel, you know that me and Rochester, New York are old friends. I had some very, very choice criticisms for Sandra Dorley, their former district attorney. Great series. That was the first series I ever did that gained over 1,000 views. A lot of people enjoyed that. Y'all, I'm Derek Judd for Cowboy Criminology. I want to thank the Cowboy Criminology crew, especially Adabee, for suggesting this wonderful content. Y'all, please stay safe, take care of yourselves, and I will see you next time.
Out on the edge where the cold winds blow, truth runs deeper than the stories they told. Cowboy Criminology, ride the line, getting to the truth behind true crime.